The evening shift at Memorial Hospital had just ended, and Amy Chen walked wearily to her car in the dimly lit parking lot. After 12 hours of caring for patients, all she wanted was to drive home and sink into her bed. The cool autumn air brushed against her face as she approached her modest Honda Civic, a car she'd saved up for during her first year as a registered nurse. She noticed something was wrong before she even reached the vehicle. The parking lot lights reflected off shattered glass scattered around her car like dangerous diamonds. Her heart sank as she got closer. Both side mirrors were broken, deep scratches marred the paint, and one of the tires had been slashed. Amy's hands trembled as she took out her phone to call the police. That's when she heard the rumble of motorcycles approaching. 3 bikes circled her car like sharks, their riders wearing leather jackets with a local motorcycle club's insignia. She recognized them immediately. They were relatives of a patient who had passed away during her shift last week, despite the medical team's best efforts to save him. "Remember us, nurse?" the largest of the 3 called out, his voice rough with barely contained anger. "This is just the beginning. You let our cousin die." Amy stood her ground, her medical training kicking in as she kept her voice steady. "I understand you're grieving, but we did everything we could to save him. Vandalizing my car won't bring him back." The bikers laughed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls of the parking structure. "We're just getting started," another one threatened, revving his engine. What the bikers didn't know was that Amy had already pressed her phone's emergency contact button. Her brother David, a former military combat medic who lived nearby, was already on his way. She just needed to keep calm and avoid escalating the situation. The next few minutes felt like hours as the bikers continued to circle and taunt her. Amy's mind raced through her options. She couldn't get in her damaged car, and running might only provoke them further. She maintained her professional demeanor, the same one she used when dealing with aggressive patients in the ER. Suddenly, the screech of tires echoed through the parking lot as David's truck came to a stop between Amy and the bikers. He stepped out calmly, his movements controlled and purposeful. At 6 feet 2 inches with broad shoulders, his presence alone commanded attention, but it was his quiet confidence that made the bikers pause. "I suggest you gentlemen leave now," David said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had faced far worse situations in combat zones. "The police are already on their way, and there's security camera footage of everything you've done tonight." The largest biker revved his engine aggressively. "This isn't your business, man. The nurse needs to learn a lesson." David's expression remained unchanged as he moved closer to the group. "That nurse is my sister, and she spent 12 hours trying to save your cousin's life. I was a combat medic. I know exactly what it's like to lose someone despite doing everything possible to save them. Your grief doesn't give you the right to terrorize someone who tried to help." His words seemed to pierce through their anger. The bikers exchanged uncertain glances as David continued, "I'm giving you a chance to leave before the police arrive. Next time you're grieving, try visiting the hospital's counseling service instead of destroying property and threatening healthcare workers." The sound of distant sirens seemed to finally break through to them. The leader of the group nodded curtly, and within moments, they had roared away into the night, leaving behind only the echo of their engines and the evidence of their vandalism. As the adrenaline wore off, Amy's legs nearly gave out. David steadied her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You okay, sis?" She nodded, finally allowing herself to shake. I never expected them to take their grief out like this. We really did try to save him." "I know you did," David replied, pulling her into a hug. "That's what we do, we try to save everyone, but sometimes we can't. That doesn't make it our fault." The police arrived minutes later, taking statements and photographs of the damage. The hospital's security team provided the camera footage, and within days, the bikers were identified and arrested. They were ordered to pay for the damages to Amy's car and attend grief counseling as part of their sentence. The incident led the hospital to implement new security measures for staff, including upgraded lighting and security patrols in the parking areas. Amy continued her work as a nurse, her dedication to helping others unchanged by the experience. She knew that while she couldn't save everyone, she would never stop trying. David started volunteering at the hospital's veteran support group, helping others deal with loss and grief in healthier ways. The siblings' bond grew stronger through the experience, a reminder that sometimes the worst situations can bring out the best in people and lead to positive changes that benefit many others. In the weeks following the parking lot incident, Amy threw herself back into her work at Memorial Hospital, determined not to let fear control her life. Her damaged Honda had been repaired, but the memory of that night lingered. What surprised her most wasn't the lingering anxiety, it was how the experience had sparked unexpected changes in the community. Word of the incident had spread through the hospital staff, and Amy's colleagues rallied around her with support. Many shared their own stories of dealing with grief-stricken families, creating an informal support network that grew stronger each day. The night shift nurses now walked to their cars in groups, watching out for each other with a newfound sense of solidarity. One quiet evening, while Amy was checking on her patients, she received an unexpected visitor. The mother of the patient whose death had triggered the biker incident stood in the doorway of the nurse's station, her eyes red from crying. "I heard what my nephews did to you," the woman said softly, her hands clutching her purse. "I wanted to apologize. My son wouldn't have wanted this, he always said the nurses here were angels." Amy invited her to sit in the break room, where they shared a cup of coffee. The woman, Mrs. Rodriguez, spoke about her son, his battle with illness, and how the family had struggled to cope with their loss. Amy listened, offering the same compassion she showed all her patients and their families. "Your brother was right," Mrs. Rodriguez said, wiping her eyes. "We needed counseling, not revenge. My nephews, they're good boys who just lost their way in their grief. The counseling they're getting now as part of their sentence, it's helping them understand that." Meanwhile, David's involvement with the hospital's veteran support group was making waves of its own. His unique perspective as both a combat medic and a protective brother resonated with the veterans he counseled. He understood both the instinct to fight and the wisdom to know when to step back. During one session, he shared the parking lot story, using it to illustrate how combat skills could be used for de-escalation rather than confrontation. "The strongest weapon I had that night wasn't my training in hand-to-hand combat," he explained to the group. "It was understanding what those men were really fighting, their grief." The story struck a chord with one veteran in particular, a former motorcycle club member named Ray. After the session, he approached David with an idea. "Your sister's story, it got me thinking. My old club used to do hospital visits, you know? Bringing toys to kids in the cancer ward, that sort of thing. Maybe we could start something similar here, but focused on supporting hospital staff." The idea took root. Ray reached out to his old connections in the motorcycle community, and soon a new group formed, the Hospital Guardian Angels. Made up of veterans and responsible motorcycle enthusiasts, they volunteered to escort healthcare workers to their cars during late shifts and organized fundraisers for hospital security improvements. Amy watched this transformation with amazement. The same parking lot where she'd once felt threatened now regularly hosted motorcycle rallies, not to intimidate, but to support. The rumble of engines became a sound of comfort rather than fear. The three bikers who had vandalized Amy's car completed their sentenced community service at the hospital. Under David and Ray's mentorship, they began to channel their energy into helping others. The youngest one, still struggling with his cousin's death, enrolled in EMT training, determined to save lives rather than threaten them. 1 year after the incident, Memorial Hospital hosted a community health fair. Amy staffed the blood pressure screening station, and David ran a booth about PTSD awareness. The Hospital Guardian Angels provided security and entertainment, their polished bikes lined up for children to admire under careful supervision. Mrs. Rodriguez brought her entire family, including her nephews. They approached Amy's station nervously, but she greeted them with professional courtesy. The oldest nephew spoke up, his voice heavy with sincerity. "What we did that night, there's no excuse," he said. "But seeing how you and your brother turned it into something positive, it taught us something about real strength." Amy checked his blood pressure, maintaining her professional demeanor. "Normal," she announced with a small smile. "Just like forgiveness, it's part of the healing process." The health fair became an annual event, symbolizing the unexpected ways that one incident of conflict had transformed into ongoing community cooperation. David often reflected that his military training had taught him how to fight, but this experience had taught him and others how to heal. The story of the nurse, her veteran brother, and the bikers became part of hospital lore, shared with new staff members as an example of how confrontation could lead to connection, and how understanding could transform enemies into allies. It served as a reminder that behind every act of aggression, there was often a deeper pain seeking resolution. For Amy, the most profound change was in herself. She no longer saw herself as just a nurse who had needed protection, but as part of a larger community that had learned to protect each other. Every time she walked through the parking lot after a late shift, accompanied by the distant rumble of motorcycles on patrol, she was reminded that sometimes the best way to overcome fear was to transform it into something meaningful. The success of Memorial Hospital's community outreach program had caught the attention of healthcare facilities across the state. As winter approached, Amy found herself increasingly requested as a speaker at medical conferences, sharing how a potentially violent confrontation had transformed into a model of community healing. During one such presentation, she noticed a group of hospital administrators paying particular attention. They approached her afterward, explaining that their facilities in rougher neighborhoods faced similar challenges with security. The Hospital Guardian Angels program had given them hope that there might be a better solution than simply adding more armed guards. David, who had accompanied Amy to the conference, listened intently to their concerns. His experience as a combat medic had taught him that security wasn't just about showing force, it was about building trust and understanding. He shared how the program had evolved beyond simple escort services to include conflict resolution training for both hospital staff and security personnel. The key was recognizing that most people who act out at hospitals aren't inherently violent, David explained to the group. They're usually experiencing the worst days of their lives. Our veterans understand trauma, and our reformed bikers understand rebellion. Together, they're uniquely qualified to de-escalate tense situations. Back at Memorial Hospital, the impact of their program continued to ripple outward in unexpected ways. The emergency department had seen a significant decrease in violent incidents since the Guardian Angels began their volunteer work. Their presence alone seemed to calm agitated visitors, and their ability to relate to people in crisis proved invaluable. One cold night, Amy was working in the ER when a group of young motorcycle riders arrived, supporting a friend with a badly injured leg. Their nervous energy and leather jackets initially set the security team on edge, but Ray, who was on duty with the Guardian Angels, recognized the signs of panic rather than aggression. He approached the group, his own leather jacket marking him as one of their own. "Your friend's in good hands," he assured them, gesturing toward Amy. "I've seen her work miracles. Why don't you tell me what happened while they get him sorted out?" As Amy treated the injured rider, she overheard Ray talking with the group. They had been doing stunts in an abandoned parking lot, the same kind of risky behavior that had led Ray down a troubled path in his younger days. Instead of lecturing them, he shared his own experiences and invited them to the hospital's motorcycle safety workshops. The injured rider turned out to be a talented mechanic, and during his recovery, Ray introduced him to the Guardian Angels community service projects. Within months, he was teaching basic motorcycle maintenance classes to other young riders, keeping them off the streets and connected to positive role models. The hospital's administration took notice of these organic developments. They allocated funding for a formal mentorship program, pairing troubled youth with veterans and reformed bikers. The program focused on channeling rebellious energy into community service and providing career guidance in healthcare-adjacent fields like emergency medical services and hospital maintenance. Amy's brother David saw another opportunity in this evolution. He worked with the hospital's rehabilitation department to create a specialized program for veterans struggling with PTSD. The program combined traditional therapy with motorcycle maintenance and community service, giving participants a sense of purpose and belonging. Working with your hands can be incredibly therapeutic, David explained to a news crew that came to cover the program's success. Add the brotherhood of riding and the satisfaction of helping others, and you've got a powerful tool for healing. The story caught the attention of the state's Department of Veteran Affairs. They began studying the Memorial Hospital model as a potential template for other communities. What had started as a response to one frightening incident was becoming a blueprint for social change. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had become a regular volunteer at the hospital, often marveled at the transformation. "My nephews were so angry after losing their cousin," she told Amy during one of their now regular coffee breaks. "They needed guidance more than punishment. Now they're the ones guiding others away from making the same mistakes." The youngest nephew had completed his EMT training and often worked alongside Amy in the emergency department. His understanding of both medical care and street life made him particularly effective with difficult patients. He never forgot the night he had threatened Amy, using that memory to fuel his commitment to protecting healthcare workers. As spring returned to the city, Memorial Hospital hosted a graduation ceremony for the first class of their youth mentorship program. The parking lot, once the site of violence and fear, was filled with proudly polished motorcycles and beaming families. Young people who might have once been troublemakers were receiving certificates in everything from basic life support to motorcycle maintenance. Amy watched from the podium as David presented the certificates, her eyes occasionally drifting to the spot where she had faced down the angry bikers a year and a half ago. The fear of that night had long since faded, replaced by pride in what their community had built from that moment of crisis. "Sometimes the worst moments in our lives become turning points," she told the gathered crowd. "They show us not just who we are, but who we can become. Every person here today is proof that with the right support and understanding, we can transform our darkest moments into opportunities for growth." The ceremony ended with a charity ride through the city, led by the Guardian Angels and followed by the program graduates. The thundering parade of motorcycles, once a sound that had struck fear in Amy's heart, now represented the heartbeat of a community that had learned to turn conflict into cooperation, anger into action, and fear into hope. As Memorial Hospital's innovative program gained national attention, Amy found herself reflecting on how far they'd come from that frightening night in the parking lot. The hospital had received an invitation to present their community integration model at a national healthcare conference in Chicago, and both Amy and David were selected as keynote speakers. The morning of their presentation, Amy stood in front of her hotel mirror, adjusting her professional attire. David knocked on her door, dressed in a suit but wearing the Guardian Angel's pin on his lapel, a small motorcycle wing that had become a symbol of protection and community service. "Ready to tell our story, sis?" he asked, his voice carrying the same calm confidence that had diffused the situation that crucial night. The conference hall was packed with healthcare administrators, security specialists, and community outreach coordinators from across the country. As Amy began their presentation, she noticed Ray and two other Guardian Angels standing at the back of the room, their leather jackets a stark contrast to the sea of business attire. "2 years ago, I was a nurse who faced violence in a hospital parking lot," Amy began, her voice steady. "Today, I'm part of a movement that's changing how healthcare facilities approach community relations and security." She shared how the incident had revealed a deeper truth about hospital security, that traditional approaches often fail to address the root causes of violence against healthcare workers. David then took the stage, explaining how his military experience had taught him that the most effective security came from building bridges rather than walls. "In combat, we learned that winning hearts and minds was more effective than show of force," David explained. The same principle applies to hospital security. When people feel heard and supported, they're less likely to resort to violence. Ray stepped forward to share his perspective, describing how the Guardian Angels program had given former troublemakers a chance to become part of the solution. The audience was particularly moved by his description of their youth mentorship program, which had already shown promising results in reducing gang activity around the hospital. During the Q&A session, a hospital administrator from Detroit shared a sobering statistic about rising violence against healthcare workers in her city. "How do you convince hardened individuals to buy into this program?" she asked. Amy glanced at David before responding. "We don't try to convince them. We show them. Every guardian angel has a story of transformation. When young people see former gang members and veterans working together to protect healthcare workers, it changes their perspective on what strength really means." Back at Memorial Hospital, the program continued to evolve. The youngest Rodriguez nephew, now a full-time EMT, had started a peer support group for young people dealing with grief and loss. He used his own experience of losing his cousin and nearly making a terrible mistake to connect with others at risk of choosing a destructive path. One evening, while Amy was finishing her shift, she received an urgent call from the ER. A teenage boy had been brought in after a motorcycle accident, and his friends were becoming increasingly agitated in the waiting room. When she arrived, she found the Rodriguez nephew already there, talking calmly with the group. "I know exactly how you're feeling," he told them, his EMT uniform lending weight to his words. "I once stood in this same hospital, angry and scared, thinking violence was the answer. Let me tell you where that path leads, and where a different choice can take you." The incident highlighted another success of their program, the creation of a rapid response team specifically trained to handle emotional crises in the hospital. The team included veterans, former gang members, and healthcare workers, all trained in de-escalation techniques and peer support. David's veteran program had expanded to include art therapy sessions where participants customized motorcycles while processing their trauma. The finished bikes were donated to the Guardian Angels program, creating a cycle of healing and giving back to the community. Mrs. Rodriguez had become an unofficial grandmother figure to many young people in the program. She hosted weekly dinners where program participants could share their struggles and successes. Her home became a safe haven where veterans, former gang members, and healthcare workers could find common ground over home-cooked meals. "When my son died," she told Amy during one such dinner, "I thought our family would never heal. Now look at us, his death led to something that's saving other families from the same pain." The hospital's security statistics told a compelling story. Violent incidents had decreased by 60% since the program's inception. More importantly, community engagement had increased, with local residents viewing the hospital as a resource rather than just an institution. During a staff meeting, the hospital's chief of security shared an unexpected development. Other organizations in the city, schools, community centers, and even local businesses, had begun requesting Guardian Angels' presence at their events. The motorcycle group that had once threatened violence had become ambassadors of peace. Amy's original Honda Civic, long since repaired, still bore a small scratch from that fateful night. She had chosen to keep it as a reminder of how a single incident could spark widespread change. Now, whenever new members joined the Guardian Angels, she would show them that scratch and share the story of transformation. "See this?" she would say, running her finger along the faint mark. This could have been the start of a cycle of violence. Instead, it became the beginning of a cycle of healing. The success of their program had begun to influence police training as well. Local law enforcement had started incorporating lessons from the Guardian Angels' de-escalation techniques into their own protocols. Officers were now regularly invited to participate in the hospital's community engagement events, building trust between law enforcement and the communities they served. As Amy drove home that evening, she passed a group of Guardian Angels escorting a nurse to her car. The sight had become so common that most hospital staff hardly noticed anymore. But Amy never took it for granted. She remembered the fear of that night, the sound of hostile motorcycles circling her car. Now those same sounds meant protection and community, a reminder that even the darkest moments could lead to light. The changing seasons brought new challenges and opportunities to Memorial Hospital's groundbreaking program. As autumn leaves began to fall, Amy received news that would test the strength of everything they had built. A major hospital merger was on the horizon, and the new administration had questions about the cost-effectiveness of the Guardian Angels program. "They want hard data," the hospital administrator explained during an emergency meeting. "Emotional success stories aren't enough anymore. We need to prove this program is worth the investment." David sat next to Amy during the meeting, his expression thoughtful. After years of military service, he understood bureaucracy all too well. "Then we'll give them data," he said firmly. "We've been tracking everything from incident reports to community engagement metrics. We just need to present it in their language." Over the next few weeks, Amy and David worked with Ray and the hospital's research department to compile comprehensive statistics. They discovered that beyond the obvious decrease in violent incidents, the program had led to significant cost savings in security personnel, property damage, and staff turnover. The younger Rodriguez nephew, now a respected member of the emergency response team, contributed his own observations. "We're not just preventing violence," he explained during a presentation to the new board members. "We're changing how people see healthcare workers. That has value you can't always measure in dollars." During their research, they uncovered an unexpected trend. Hospitals in neighboring cities had reported an increase in staff applications, specifically citing Memorial's community program as their reason for applying. The Guardian Angels had become a recruitment tool, attracting healthcare workers who valued community engagement and innovative security approaches. One evening, while Amy was organizing data in the break room, she received an urgent call from the ER. A major traffic accident had brought in multiple trauma patients, including several members of a motorcycle club from a neighboring city. The waiting room was filling with worried bikers, creating a potentially volatile situation. Without hesitation, Amy contacted Ray and the Guardian Angels. Within minutes, they arrived to help manage the situation. The sight of respected bikers in Guardian Angels jackets immediately changed the atmosphere. Ray moved through the crowd, offering coffee and updates, while other angels shared stories of their own experiences with hospital trauma care. "See this?" Ray told the worried group, pointing to his Guardian Angels pin. "This means we understand both sides, the medical staff working to save lives, and the brotherhood waiting for news. We're here to help you all get through this together." The incident became another powerful data point in their presentation to the new administration. It demonstrated how the program didn't just prevent violence, it actively contributed to better patient care and community relations. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had become an unofficial ambassador for the program, spoke at the board meeting, sharing how the initiative had transformed her family's grief into purpose. "When my nephews vandalized that car," she said, her voice steady, "they were drowning in pain. This program didn't just stop them from making more mistakes, it gave them a way to help others avoid the same path." The hospital's chief of medicine added his own perspective, describing how the program had improved staff retention rates. "Our nurses and doctors feel safer, but it's more than that," he explained. "They feel supported by the community in a way that's unique to our hospital." David presented the financial data, showing how the program had actually saved money in unexpected ways. The decrease in security incidents had led to lower insurance premiums. Staff turnover had dropped significantly, reducing recruitment and training costs. Even the hospital's public image had improved, leading to increased donations and community support. "This isn't just a security program," David explained to the board. "It's a community investment that pays dividends in ways we're still discovering." The new administration listened intently as Amy shared recent developments. The Guardian Angels had started partnering with local technical schools, creating apprenticeship programs for at-risk youth interested in healthcare-related careers. Former troublemakers were now training to become medical technicians, maintenance specialists, and emergency responders. One board member raised concerns about liability issues. In response, Ray introduced them to their insurance provider, who had become one of the program's strongest advocates. The provider shared data showing how the hospital's risk profile had improved dramatically since the program's inception. Traditional security measures treat symptoms, the insurance representative explained. This program addresses root causes. From our perspective, that's a much better risk management strategy. As winter approached, the board reached their decision. Not only would the Guardian Angels program continue, but they approved funding for its expansion. The new administration recognized that the program's value extended far beyond simple security metrics. To celebrate the program's continuation, the Guardian Angels organized a community health fair in the hospital parking lot. The same space that had once witnessed a confrontation now hosted free health screenings, motorcycle safety demonstrations, and community outreach programs. Amy watched from the hospital entrance as David conducted a workshop on emergency preparedness. Nearby, the Rodriguez nephew taught basic first aid to a group of young motorcycle enthusiasts. Ray supervised a motorcycle maintenance clinic that doubled as a mentorship opportunity for troubled youth. Mrs. Rodriguez had set up a grief counseling booth, sharing her family's story with others struggling to cope with loss. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead us to our true purpose, she told a young woman who had recently lost her brother. The key is being open to transformation. As the day drew to a close, Amy noticed a familiar face in the crowd, the insurance representative who had helped convince the board. He was watching a group of Guardian Angels teach children about motorcycle safety, using specially designed mini-bikes. "You know," he said when Amy approached, "I've been in risk management for 20 years. I've never seen anything quite like this. You've turned a liability into an asset, fear into strength, conflict into cooperation. That's not just good healthcare, it's good business." Looking out over the bustling health fair, Amy reflected on how far they had come from that frightening night in the parking lot. The program had survived its first major challenge, emerging stronger and with renewed purpose. What had started as a response to violence had evolved into a model for community healthcare that others were eager to emulate. Spring brought unexpected challenges to Memorial Hospital's Guardian Angels program. A series of natural disasters in neighboring states had led to an influx of displaced patients and families, putting additional strain on the hospital's resources and testing the program's adaptability. Amy arrived for her shift one stormy morning to find the emergency department overwhelmed with evacuees from a flood-ravaged community 3 states away. Many had arrived on motorcycles, carrying only what they could fit in their saddlebags. The sight of leather-clad bikers filling the waiting room might once have caused tension, but now it presented an opportunity. "We need to expand our support network," David told the Guardian Angels during an emergency meeting. "These people have lost everything. They need more than just medical care." Ray immediately mobilized the motorcycle community. Within hours, the Guardian Angels had organized temporary housing for the displaced bikers, coordinating with local motorcycle clubs to provide shelter, food, and basic necessities. The hospital parking lot became a coordination center for relief efforts. "When I lost my cousin here, I thought this hospital was the enemy," the Rodriguez nephew shared with a group of evacuees as he helped distribute supplies. "Now I understand that healing happens in many ways. Sometimes it's medical care, sometimes it's just having someone who understands what you're going through." The crisis revealed new dimensions of the program's potential. Veterans in the Guardian Angels program recognized the signs of trauma in the evacuees and began organizing informal support groups. The combination of their military experience and biker camaraderie created a unique environment where people felt comfortable sharing their struggles. Mrs. Rodriguez transformed her regular community dinners into daily support meetings for displaced families. Her home became a gathering place where evacuees could find not just a meal, but a sense of belonging. The story of how her family's tragedy had led to community healing resonated deeply with people who were facing their own losses. Grief comes in many forms, she told a young mother who had lost her home. But so does healing. Sometimes the family you need most is the one you find in the middle of a crisis. The hospital administration, which had recently affirmed their support for the program, watched in amazement as the guardian angels seamlessly integrated disaster response into their community outreach model. What had started as a security program had evolved into a comprehensive community support network. Amy found herself working alongside bikers who had arrived as evacuees but quickly volunteered to help others. The sight of leather-clad volunteers working in harmony with medical staff became a powerful symbol of the program's success in breaking down barriers. One evening, while coordinating relief efforts, Amy received an unexpected visit from a journalist working on a documentary about community responses to natural disasters. The reporter had heard about the Guardian Angels program and was intrigued by how a hospital security initiative had transformed into a model for community resilience. The most remarkable thing, Amy explained during her interview, is how the program keeps evolving to meet new challenges. What started with my brother defending me in a parking lot has grown into something that helps people rebuild their lives. David's veteran support group expanded to include sessions specifically focused on disaster-related trauma. His experience as a combat medic proved invaluable in helping both veterans and evacuees process their experiences of loss and displacement. In combat, we learned that survival often depends on the strength of your unit, David told his group. What we're building here is a different kind of unit, one that helps people survive the battles they face in civilian life. The younger Rodriguez nephew, drawing on his EMT training, developed a crash course in basic emergency response for motorcycle clubs in flood-prone areas. The program combined practical skills with the Guardian Angels' philosophy of community service. We're not just teaching people how to respond to emergencies, he explained during a training session. We're showing them how to turn their love of riding into a way to help their communities. Ray worked with local motorcycle shops to establish a network for distributing emergency supplies to isolated communities. The sight of Guardian Angels motorcycles arriving with medical supplies and basic necessities became a symbol of hope in areas still struggling with flood damage. The crisis also led to unexpected partnerships. Local businesses, impressed by the Guardian Angels' emergency response capabilities, began offering support. A major motorcycle manufacturer donated equipment for emergency response training, while local restaurants provided meals for volunteers and evacuees. This is exactly what we hoped the program would become, the hospital's chief of medicine remarked during a staff meeting. Not just a security solution, but a model for how healthcare facilities can serve as centers for community resilience. As the immediate crisis began to subside, the hospital found itself with a stronger connection to the motorcycle community than ever before. Many of the evacuees who had initially arrived seeking help had become valuable volunteers, bringing their own experiences and skills to the program. Amy's original Honda Civic, still bearing that small reminder of the incident that started it all, had become a kind of unofficial mascot for the program. New volunteers would often ask to see the scratch, now understanding it as a symbol of how conflict could transform into cooperation. The documentary crew captured a powerful moment when one of the evacuee bikers, who had lost his home in the floods, received news that the Guardian Angels had helped organize a rebuild effort in his community. His emotional response, filmed in the same parking lot where the program had begun, demonstrated how far the initiative had come. "I came here thinking I'd lost everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Instead, I found a new purpose." That's what this program does, it shows people how to turn their darkest moments into opportunities to help others. The spring crisis had tested the program in unexpected ways, but it had also revealed its true strength. What had begun as a response to violence had evolved into a model for community resilience, demonstrating how healthcare facilities could serve as anchors for social support and recovery. 3 years had passed since that fateful night in the hospital parking lot, and Memorial Hospital was preparing for a special anniversary celebration. The event would mark not just the success of the Guardian Angels program, but a fundamental shift in how healthcare facilities approached community relations across the country. Amy stood in the transformed parking lot, now expanded to include a dedicated community center built with donations from motorcycle clubs, veterans organizations, and local businesses. The space that had once witnessed confrontation had become a symbol of unity and healing. "Sometimes I wonder if we should thank those bikers who vandalized my car," Amy told David as they prepared for the ceremony. "Without that night, none of this might have happened." David adjusted his tie, the Guardian Angel's pin gleaming on his lapel. "It's not about thanking them," he replied. "It's about recognizing that sometimes the best solutions come from understanding our adversaries." The anniversary celebration had drawn visitors from across the country, healthcare administrators, community leaders, and representatives from motorcycle clubs interested in establishing similar programs. The documentary about their disaster response efforts had sparked national interest, and the Guardian Angels model was being adapted by hospitals in various communities. Ray, now a respected community leader, had organized a motorcycle procession to open the ceremony. Hundreds of bikes thundered into the parking lot, their riders wearing the distinctive Guardian Angels patches that had become symbols of protection and service. The Rodriguez family had a special place of honor at the ceremony. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose grief had once threatened to tear her family apart, now ran a nationally recognized grief counseling program that specifically worked with families affected by hospital losses. "Our pain could have destroyed us," she told the gathered crowd. "Instead, it became the foundation for healing others. That's the real miracle of this program, it shows people how to transform their darkness into light." The younger Rodriguez nephew, who had completed his paramedic training and now coordinated emergency response training for motorcycle clubs nationwide, shared how the program had changed his perspective on strength and responsibility. "I came to this hospital wanting revenge," he admitted to the audience. "I left with a purpose. Now, every time I help someone in crisis, I remember that night and how close I came to choosing a different path." The hospital's chief of medicine presented impressive statistics. Violent incidents had decreased by 80% across facilities that had implemented the Guardian Angels program. Staff retention rates had improved dramatically, and community engagement metrics showed unprecedented levels of trust between healthcare workers and local residents. But the most powerful moments came from the personal stories. A nurse from a hospital in Detroit described how their adapted version of the program had helped bridge decades-old divides between the hospital and the surrounding community. A veteran shared how maintaining motorcycles for the Guardian Angels had helped him cope with PTSD and find new purpose in civilian life. Amy's original Honda Civic had been retired to a special display in the community center, its battle scars preserved as a reminder of the program's origins. Next to it stood a wall of photographs showing Guardian Angels in action, escorting healthcare workers, delivering supplies to disaster areas, mentoring troubled youth, and building bridges between different communities. David had expanded the veteran integration aspect of the program into a comprehensive support network. Combat veterans found that their military experience, combined with motorcycle culture and community service, created a powerful framework for civilian reintegration. "In the military, we learned that the strongest weapon is the ability to turn enemies into allies," David explained during his address. "This program proves that the same principle works in civilian life. We're not just preventing violence, we're creating understanding." The documentary crew had returned to film the anniversary celebration, capturing the moment when a group of young riders, graduates of the mentorship program, received their Guardian Angels patches. Among them was a teenager who had lost his home in the floods, now training to become an emergency medical technician. "These patches aren't just symbols," Ray told the new members. "They're a responsibility. They mean you've chosen to be part of the solution, to protect instead of threaten, to build instead of destroy. The ceremony included the groundbreaking for a new wing of the community center, funded entirely by donations from motorcycle clubs and community members. The space would house expanded training facilities, counseling services, and a 24-hour crisis response center. Amy's role had evolved as well. She now directed the hospital's community integration department, helping other facilities implement similar programs while maintaining her nursing duties. Her story had become a case study in healthcare administration programs, demonstrating how crisis could catalyze positive institutional change. The most important lesson, she shared during her closing remarks, is that security isn't just about preventing bad things from happening. It's about creating an environment where people feel valued, understood, and supported. When you achieve that, the need for traditional security measures naturally decreases. Mrs. Rodriguez's community dinners had grown into a regular event that brought together healthcare workers, veterans, bikers, and local residents. These gatherings became a model for other hospitals, showing how informal connections could strengthen formal support systems. At my first dinner after the incident, she recalled, I was serving meals to the people who had threatened my son's nurse. Today, I'm serving meals to people who protect nurses. That's the power of understanding and forgiveness. The anniversary celebration concluded with a candlelight vigil, honoring both the losses that had led to the program's creation and the positive changes that had emerged from those difficult moments. As hundreds of candles illuminated the parking lot, their light reflected off the chrome of countless motorcycles, creating a powerful visual metaphor for the program's impact. The young EMT who had once vandalized Amy's car stood beside her during the vigil, both of them holding candles. You know, he said quietly, that night, I thought I was fighting against the system. Now I understand that the real fight is against misunderstanding and fear. As the ceremony drew to a close, David gathered the original guardian angels for a group photo in front of Amy's preserved Honda. The small scratch that had once represented violence now stood as a reminder that positive change often began in unexpected moments of crisis. The Guardian Angels program had become more than just a security initiative or a community outreach effort. It had evolved into a movement that demonstrated how healthcare facilities could serve as catalysts for social transformation, turning potential adversaries into allies and creating networks of support that extended far beyond hospital walls.